So let's start with this United Nations World Tourism Organization, the UNWTO. And they have a very specific definition of ecotourism. And they kind of define it in five parts. And this has been something that's been, I think, developed over time and is agreed upon at a global level, at least from the United Nations perspective, of what ecotourism is. So the first component, they say, the first characteristic, and they have five of them, like I said, of ecotourism in their definition is this, and I'll read it verbatim. The first characteristic is all nature-based forms of tourism in which the main motivation of the tourist is the observation and appreciation of nature, as well as the traditional cultures prevailing in natural areas. So nature-based forms of tourism where motivation is observation and appreciation, as well as observation and appreciation of the traditional cultures in the natural areas. So what does that mean for us as divers? I mean, how's your reaction to that first kind of characteristic there?
Well, that's basically everything that the dive industry does in all these tropical locations. When you talk about going to Bonaire, the Bahamas, or Hawaii, it's all about that nature-based form of tourism where you go and observe and appreciate the nature. So snorkeling, scuba diving, reef walks, glass bottom boat tours, that all contributes and adds up to coral reef tourism. And it makes up a big industry for a lot of these smaller, less economically rich nations. These poorer nations, they thrive on a lot of this reef tourism to bring in people. The tourism industry makes up a huge part of their GDP. So going there as a visitor and contributing, when you go and look at these nature reserves, that's what you're doing. Is you're going out there and contributing to a form of ecotourism.
Yeah, I find in this definition, this first characteristic, the word motivation to be really interesting there. And motivation is hard to measure, right? In the sense that, there are multiple motivations that we might have to do something. But I think the motivation of us as an industry, as divers, when we travel, ought to be, and I think for the most part is, observing and appreciating that nature that we're in, right? Mm-hmm. I think there is some layers there. Certainly there are people that, the motivation may be different. Maybe the motivation is, we talked about treasure hunting before, or, actually, it's fishing. They've got in Florida the big lionfish hunts, which there's a debate about, is that good or bad? And the argument prevailing right now is it's good because we're the natural predator to the lionfish, or not natural predator, but we're the only predator to the lionfish.
Yeah, they're killing invasive species.
Right, but again, there's a question there, right? The motivation is a little bit: is that to go kill the fish, or is it to preserve the environment? But I think the word motivation linked back to observation and appreciation, I think that's where you get back to, like, are we able to truly appreciate those locations for where they are? And it kind of ties into, do we understand the way that a coral reef is formed? Do we understand how that geological formation that we're looking at in a cave happened? And that to me, at least for me, when I'm educating myself a little bit more about where I'm diving and the natural ecosystem that I'm going to be a part of, then the appreciation level goes up tenfold, 20-fold, whatever it is. I mean, I was looking at some video of a friend of mine going through this French cave, and I mean, it's a totally different looking cave than what you'll see in Florida or what you see in Mexico. And he was talking about how they are in this cave that's actually under another river, and how the water over however many millennia had formed out this cave, and he knew the kind of the story behind how it was formed, and all of the particular information that's relevant to that. and his level of appreciation for that cave. It wasn't just wet rocks, which is all caves are just wet rocks, right? That's basically, cave divers just like looking at wet rocks. But his appreciation for how it was made and all those things. And I find sometimes on a dive boat, and I don't know about you, that the educational piece of the diver that's about to jump into whatever site the operator is taking them to, we're not as educated as maybe we could be. That I think limits our appreciation and maybe can excuse some of the bad habits or bad things that we kind of get ourselves into. I think we'll get into later in this episode.
Oh yeah.
For the appreciation side of it. So anyway, I guess the argument I'm trying to make is that the more knowledgeable we are about the environments that we're getting into, the higher level of appreciation we can have for that experience. And I think that ties into our motivation. Like if our motivation is truly not just go look at pretty things, but to appreciate that nature, then there's also maybe a level before we even get on the plane where we're trying to understand that reef system, or the species that are unique or endemic to that space, or even the time of year has an influence on what you're going to see, and that levels a lot of the appreciation to a greater level in my mind.
Yeah, no, absolutely. From even a biological perspective, outside of the coral reef, all the fish that live on it, there's so many different species out there and how they interact with the ecosystem as a whole. If you don't begin to appreciate the small cogs in the machine that make it run well, then you're not going to have a very clean burning or optimal machine. And it's the same thing with an ecosystem. If you take bits of it out, you're only hurting the whole system. The whole system becomes jeopardized almost when you start removing bits of it. So having an appreciation for the ecosystem and the environment we dive in definitely adds to the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. The other piece that's interesting about this first characteristic that the UNWTO is defining here too is they add in the idea of the traditional cultures prevailing in natural areas. And I found that interesting because again, you're kind of now talking about the land brain. Mm-hmm. And you're also talking about understanding the space that you're in. So, a stupid, for example, that I think a lot of divers have been to is when you talk about something like, the Mayan Riviera, right? When you talk about Mexico and the Gulf there. And, largely a big tourist area for all sorts of reasons. I mean, not just divers, but divers, it's like a Disneyland. We have, clear ocean with beautiful reefs, a couple of wrecks out there. We have, Cozumel, which is beautiful. And then we have the cave systems and the cenotes. I mean, it's just, concorpia or cornucopia of options to go dive. But that area is also a huge tourism area because of the Mayan temples, right? And the Maya that lived there. And even the names of a lot of the locations are still in Mayan. And so again, when you think about things like appreciation of not just that beautiful reef that's out there in Cozumel, but of the traditional culture that was there and that has thrived there for however many years, and what's happening to them, I think that adds a wrinkle to how we even plan a trip and how we approach those things. Because I think that, I'll pick on Americans for a moment, because I've traveled a lot and we have a bad rep, let's say internationally sometimes, in the sense that things get very, and the word is Americanized, right, for the American tourist, and we want that comfort level, and we have an expectation that wherever we travel should be just like home, and we almost have an intolerance for some things that are different. And so a lot of the tourism industry kind of bends towards our will because we have the almighty dollar, and things are very American in that sense. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I get it. What I am saying is an observation for me of traveling a lot internationally. And I think that part of the appreciation, observation of traditional culture is the willingness also to be uncomfortable, for things to be not as they are at home, and to appreciate them as such. And I think that that's again a mindset thing, and maybe a planning thing, that if you're going somewhere, to be mindful of the culture that prevails there and how you can become a visitor of that, and even a participant of that, rather than this ought to be more like I want it. So I don't know, I found that interesting as a second add-on to their definition here, because that is something that's kind of not happening under the water but happening on top of the water, that I think mindset wise is really important.
Yeah, yeah. It's I guess that kind of begins to beg the question of how much Americanization for any given nation is too much, because of, as Americans and probably Europeans as well, I'm sure we make up a wide margin of the tourism industry. So how much of bending down to making us comfortable is tolerable for the sustainment of the local culture? So something to think about. How much do you sacrifice for profit?
Yeah, it is something to think about. All right, that felt heavy. Sorry if I offended
Oh,
anyone out there. I probably did, but so be it. I think there is uh, a difference between someone who can be comfortable in the uncomfortable and someone who wants things to be very Americanized. And I think that it's good for us to be a little more mindful of those things.
well, the uncomfortable is where the experience really takes place. So you should look forward to being uncomfortable a little bit.
I agree. Okay, so that's the first one.